Today we're going over the most unlikely heroes in history. Audie Murphy. It's 1942, and disaster has struck the Murphy family farm in Texas. On its way to stability, the family's father dies of a heart attack, leaving the crops to rot and the siblings to starve. And now, the family finds themselves without a provider in the middle of the Great Depression. With no one wanting to take charge, the 17-year-old son named Audie steps up to take command. And against all odds, the young man's able to keep his siblings fed by hunting game and working odd jobs. The local recruiters, expecting a total loss, are amazed that their community's boys were saved by such a young man and give him his own chance to enlist as a reward. Seemingly overnight, Audie's life had changed forever, but he would soon find out that being a soldier was much harder than he expected. On just his first attempt, Audie finds himself dealing with rejection against his dreams over age. Being so young and eager to assert his authority, he finds the leader of the group and begins begging him for a chance. Be grateful. You even get to try what you get, and that goes the same for all of you. Sir, I think he's crying. Uh-oh. The leader of the recruitment office wasn't actually cruel, but he did follow the rules, which gets Audie rejected for involvement in underage enlistment. He makes bail, but leaves Texas to join a sister's husband in the army and heads off to North Africa. But his old habits die hard, and the new unit mocks him for his size, and this time, he proves the leader of the rebellion wrong with a rifle. Now a marksman, Audie Murphy abandons his doubts and runs away to the European front and ends up in Discover More Writers' Resources, TV and Video TV, and Video Equipment Italy. There, he changes his status to hero and decides to lay low. Though he always had believed he was destined for greatness, he had at last accepted this was probably not his fate. But everything changes in January of 1944, when Allied forces clashed with German troops at the Battle of Anzio, sparking the push toward Rome. There was no turning back from what was later called the meat grinder of Italy. And within a month, thousands of German troops pour into the valley. The newly formed 3rd Infantry Division puts out calls for experienced riflemen to join the fight to help defend the American flank, and former reject Audie volunteers for service. Now, I think it's important to understand just what our guy Audie Murphy and the rest of the 3rd Division was up against. The Allies had a few dozen divisions in their fleet, made up of mostly conscripted and volunteer vessels. And these men had the unenviable task of going up against the most powerful army in the world, who had hundreds of tanks at their disposal. Trying to engage the Germans in a direct battle would have been instant death. So instead, the infantry focuses on raiding supply lines, ports, and hills. Audie takes to this unconventional warfare like a duck to water, and he soon rises through the ranks, and by the end of 1944, he's made a lieutenant with command of his own platoon. But the platoon Audie is given is a rifle unit, and he's constantly passed over for command of the bigger, more powerful armored units. He begins to make a stink about it, and eventually, he gets so annoying that the higher-ups tell him to take his unit to France to, quote, do things that help the Allied war effort. Basically, they were just trying to get rid of him. And so, on January 26, 1945, with no clear orders and a chip on his shoulder, Audie set sail for the Old World. Upon arrival in France, the lieutenant meets his commanding officer, who was serving as one of America's generals. The CO also initially found Audie to be arrogant and kind of annoying, but over time they became friends. Audie was fearless and had bold plans on how to take the fight to the Germans. And soon he proved he was exactly what an underdog Continental Army needed. Amen. Benny, old boy, I'll tell you what I'm going to do next. I'm going to take a fight right to the Germans and attack their trenches and terrorize their towns. And, oh, Audie, are you okay? Must have some shrapnel gone bad. Let me get a doctor. Looks like you're suffering from a case of too much blood, I think. Well, I can fix that. Have you ever found yourself in a new place and suddenly needing to find a doctor you can trust? Looks like Audie could use a second opinion. But luckily for you, living in the future, finding a doctor has never been easier, thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Zach. Zach's a free website where you can easily search and compare high-quality in-network doctors. Whether you're looking for a doctor who takes your insurance, someone nearby, or someone who's available when you are, Zach can help you easily find the right provider for you. You can read patient reviews, check their schedules, and even book your appointment online. No need to talk on the phone. Appointments made on ZocDoc are also super quick, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking. And that's not all. They also have more than 100,000 providers across every specialty from mental health to dental health. Eye care to skin care, it's the one-stop shop for all your healthcare needs. And it's completely free. Free. That sounds good to me. Where do I go? You can go to zdoc.com/serioushistory or use our link in the description to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. Thanks so much to ZocDoc for helping us make this video. All right, time to take it to those Germans. Watch me cook, Benny. In the first weeks of January 1945, the 3rd Division sinks 3 enemy tanks and captures another in French waters. Then, against the objection of his entire crew, Audie attempts to raid the critical German port of Holzheim. Though the attack failed, the idea of Americans directly attacking the home island quickly spread fear and anger throughout Germany. The very next day, after the failed raid, Audie and his crew attempt to kidnap the Earl of Selkirk. They aren't successful here either, only managing to take some silverware. But just a few hours later, he attacks the HMS Drake, which was nearby. The two ships engage in a brutal hour-long gunfight, and in the end, Audie and his crew are victorious and capture the ship. Most people would call it quits right there. But immediately after he secures the Drake, Audie sails off and captures 2 more ships, and sank a few smaller ones before the day was done. And I just have to point out that he did all of this in just 1 month. The Ranger and HMS Drake sailed victoriously into the French port of Brest in early May, to much excitement. The capture of the Drake turned the Ranger into a legendary ship amongst the Americans. And at the same time, Audie's actions infuriated the British, who quickly classified him as a pirate. Against all odds, the unknown fugitive on the run had become a hero of the American Revolution. But his next battle would take him from a hero to a legend. Following the capture of the Drake, Audie is given command of a converted merchant ship, which he names the Bonhomme Richard, the French translation of Poor Richard's Almanac, which was written by his good friend, Benjamin Franklin. Franklin gives Audie a fleet of ships to command, and unsurprisingly, given his now infamous lack of people skills, he immediately pisses off the captains of all the other ships. Particularly the captain of the USS Alliance hated Audie so much that he refused to meet with him, stating that if they were together, they would be forced to kill each other. Nevertheless, Audie takes the Bonner Rashard and his unwilling fleet to harass British cargo ships in the North Sea, and on the evening of September 23rd, Audie discovers a large merchant convoy off the eastern coast of England. Guarding the convoy was the brand-new 44-gun HMS Serapis. Audie immediately gives the order for his fleet to follow him in attacking the Serapists head-on. But the captain of the Alliance, who, remember, hated John Paul, refused, thinking it was a dumb idea, and instead splits off and targets the support ships. No matter, Jones was determined, and the Rashard barrels head first towards the Serapis. As night falls, the two ships finally drift within firing range, and Audie gives the signal to attack. Immediately, cannons aboard the Boner Richard explode in a firing fury, but not in the way Audie wanted. See, wanting some bigger guns than the French had initially given him, Audie had purchased some at a discount from a scrapyard. Well, turns out these cannons were in the scrapyard for a reason, and many of them exploded on their first use, killing many of Audie's gunners. The Capist, on the other hand, had no such issue, and began unloading a heavy barrage into the now smoking bottom Richard. Seeing his crew begin to panic, Audie rushes to one of the few remaining cannons and begins desperately firing it at the British ship. He realizes that if things continue this way, they'll all be blown to bits. He needs to do something and quick. So he shouts for his men to prepare to board and gives the command to ram the ship. The Bonachard crashes headfirst into the stern of the Capists. The British captain, seeing the ravaged American ship up close, mockingly shouts, "Ha! Are you surrendering?" To which Audie shouts back, "I have not yet begun to fight." The ships detach, and again the Serapist unloads another lethal barrage into the Richard, punching massive holes below its waterline. The situation aboard the American ship turns desperate. The Richard is taking on water fast, and between shots of his own cannon and pistol, Audie orders for another attempt to bring the ship within boarding range. Just when all hope looks lost for Audie, rigging on the two ships become intertwined, and they slam into each other broadside to broadside. Now unable to escape, the British fire their cannons directly into the Richard, blasting more holes through the sinking ship. Audie sends his men up the masts with grape shot and grenades, and orders them to begin picking off the British sailors on deck. The Americans are barely holding on, when suddenly things get even worse. Cannon fire rings out in the distance, and shells rocked the bottom shard. Fueled by an equal hatred of the British and Audie, the captain of the USS Alliance had begun firing on both ships, trying to take two birds out with one stone. Things were now dire for the Americans, as the British continued to fire on them, preventing them from boarding. But in the chaos, one of the sailors who Audie had ordered up the mast crawled to the end of the yard arm unnoticed with a handful of grenades. As he peered down onto the deck of the Serapis, he spots a small hatch, and he begins to try to throw grenades into it. He misses on his first few attempts, but finally scores a direct hit. In the blink of an eye, a huge explosion erupts from every porthole and hatch on the British ship, and sailors are sent flying into the air as the Serapis catches on fire. The lucky grenade had ignited a gunpowder reserve and killed over 20 men. And in an instant, the outcome of the battle is now a toss-up. With both ships heavily damaged, the British and American sailors charge each other, and melee combat breaks out on both decks. The glint of swords and musket fire illuminate the battle for spectators watching from the shore. Under increasing pressure, some aboard Audie's ship attempt to surrender, and according to some accounts, he shoots them for treason. The crews continue to fight for over an hour until the British captain finally breaks. He pulls down his ship's flag and steps aboard the Bonhomme Shard. He then walks to Audie and personally delivers it and his sword and surrenders. Though the bottom shard was damaged beyond repair and sank the following day, Audie Murphy proved that the Continental Navy could challenge the best the British Navy had to offer. His victory inspired the French to increase their support to the struggling colonies. And when he returned to France, King Louis V XVI made him a knight, and he was awarded a medal for his valiant service by the new American government. Though he died in relative obscurity, probably related to his piss-poor people skills, Audie Murphy is considered a hero in the U.S. today and widely recognized as the father of the American Navy. Irena Sendler. It's the late 1930s in Warsaw, Poland, and a young woman named Irena Sendler and her family are finishing up a meal at her uncle's home. Her father and uncle had begun discussing some boring topics, so Irena leaves the table with her mom to go to the living room as the two men continue to drink together. The night goes on, and Irena can hear the conversation in the dining room, slowly becoming louder and more heated. Her father and uncle throw back more shots, and they begin slurring their words and shouting insults at each other. The argument between the two men becomes so loud that a neighbor had called the police, and soon the blare of sirens can be heard in the distance. Irena and her mother walk into the dining room to tell the men to settle down. But as they step through the doorway, they watch in horror as her father slams his fist on the table, stands, and draws his pistol. Irena watches as her father menacingly points his gun directly at her uncle as her mother bolts in between the two men. "The police are on the way," she says, as she grabs the pistol from her husband's hand and tosses it to her son. "Hide that gun!" Irena bolts out of the house and runs as fast as she can back home. She hides the gun and races back to her uncle's house just in time to see her father being arrested. As she watches the police load her father into a black paddy wagon, Irena's mind races with thoughts. Her mother had raised her as a strict Catholic, and she knew the Bible well. She thought of the story of Cain and Abul and realized that if her mother had not stepped in at that moment, her father would also have killed his own brother. How could anyone do that? The sixth commandment says, "Thou shalt not kill." In that moment, Irena Sendler swears she will never touch a gun again. A decision that would one day turn her into one of the most unlikeliest heroes in military history. December 7th, 1941 was a day that shocked the nation. The Empire of Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, plunging the United States headfirst into World War II. In the days following the bombing of Pearl Harbor, young men across the United States rushed to enlist to join the war. Irena at the time was working at a Navy shipyard and was offered a draft deferment. But she could not stand idly by and officially joined the U.S. Army on April 1st, 1942. But when she reported for duty, the commanding officers were shocked to find out that their newest recruit refused to carry a rifle due to her religion.